Hello, this is the Otherlinks Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out to me. 2 ways to do this is through email and, of course, YouTube. Now, word of mouth works. I appreciate all your listeners. And I can see, word of mouth. It's going here, the momentum. I see the momentum. Okay, so do me a favor with the business. Spread the word. You think a friend, colleague, what have you would be interested in my content, spread, let them know about the Otherlinks Light. All right, so on to the topic of choice here. Now, on Friday, I teased it a little bit here, so I'm going to get right into the nitty gritty and the flavor of the mix. So what I'm going to do this week is center on a cookbook that I find quite interesting. All right. So what it is particularly this book is Food and Wine, and it's all entitled The Best New Chefs All-Star Cookbook. Okay. Now, why do I find this book particular? I'll get into the midst of it here in this section of the podcast and get into the details about the particular aspects of it, how it's broken up, get into more of how the flow of the book is on Wednesday and talk about recipes that I find interesting in it and so forth. All right, with all that said, this is part 1. Here we go. Here we go. So, I find this book very unique because it is supplying what I was addressing and talking about, and all the things that I was saying about in the aspects of how food really defines a culture. And it's concrete. It's very concrete in the way this book is structured out. So, what it is a collection of, as you can perceive it, depending on how you want to look at it. At that time, depending on it starts from the 80s all the way up into the 100, best chefs, all-star chefs, up and coming, and so forth, and what they contribute. All right, so case in point, John, what's it? Okay, let me go to this section here where he is. Hold on, let me find it. All right, so John Best, right? Now, some people know him, some people don't. But John Best was really interesting in the way in which he merged the idea of Louisiana cuisine, Cajun Southern cuisine. He gave it a new. He gave his own sort of down home mystique and flair to it, but it was very eloquent to where it wasn't pompous, or his style of cooking is very approachable. And so when you get into this book, you start to realize and see that this book is really defining the aspects of how food in itself, all right, speaks a lot of volume in the time in which people are living. All right. Now, case in point, the 1980s. Now, particularly, it started to become its own when we get into the aspects of. Now, this is just my point of view here. Now, if y'all are new to me, if you had listened to me for quite a bit, or you're just been in here with me from the very beginning, bless you and thank you if you are one of those listeners. I can't stress enough how important I value history. Why is this? Now, I really think if you seek and understand history, and you seek more knowledge about history, it's like a roadmap to really help you see where things are going and how things are laid out. It's sort of like, depending on your point of view about it, but, to each his own. Spirituality, particular religions, they have their offsets, but I'm going to speak from a Christian point of view here because I'm Christian. If fellow Christians, people of the faith, there's so many guidelines in the aspects of once you get into the spirit of the word, understand the word, and gather the graces of Jesus and the graces of God and everything, and see all the different examples and the situations. It really is a rudimentary into the aspects of helping you move yourself through the ups and downs of life. And so, religion isn't for everybody, but history can in itself work in that kind of maneuver here. So, there's that. All right, so get back to the 1980s here. Particularly things started, and like I said, in my point of view, started to really become very established, when we get into the 80s, 85. And that is a rule of thumb, when you look at decades, because that's the benchmark. It's in the middle, right there. So things as far as what you consider about a decade is really becoming its own, because we're about halfway here. And so in the 1980s here, it was all about the aspects of fine cuisine, and all about the aspect less is more, and all about access, the mentality of less is more, but the price, sort of justifies it, because of at that point in time, chefs were more encouraged to be artistic and reach culinary feats with what was presented as cuisines. Particularly you would see this in upscale beach, where that goes without saying, in New York with the steakhouses and all these kind of things. And then, yeah, me personally, I enjoy cooking, particularly if there's something I find a lot of interesting aspects to the tedious sort of elements of cooking. But those things are very pronounced when you get to baking. Why do I say that? Because with baking, something like creme brulee or, what have you, or something like baked Alaska, what have you. Those things can really call for you to be very creative, and if you are intrigued to do this, be very masterful in how you present these things, right? And so, in the 1980s, and the way in which desserts were presented, they were showcased in that way, like chocolate mousse and drizzled linear patterns in the way, and the wafiness of the sugar sculptures around it, and then doing more and more feats with the aspects of the way cake is presented and showcased, to where you see now there's so many, there's countless programs and countless examples and how-tos of how to design cakes, to where it is you would consider it a work of art, right? And so this was really showcased a lot in the 80s, and then, when you get into things like going back to steakhouses, the way, things were drizzled on the steaks, the sauces, and how the way the plating techniques were used, how it's something, vegetables, how they were even in the meticulous representation of if you wanted sauteed or grilled, the way it was presented. They were taking it up a notch, and how it was looked, and to a point to where people really took notice of this, and the rest, what the Western world was doing and contributing into the aspects of food and culture. Okay? Now, when we move into also the elements and the economic thought patterns of the 1980s, that really explains why things were presented that way. Because that was the time where it was encouraged to have this mentality, I'm going to make as much money as I want, as I can. That, of course, there was downturn and all these kind of things, with the ebbs and flows of the economy. Of course, there was hardships and all these things, but for the most part, people had there was the encouragement, and people had the opportunity and the mentality to make as much money as possible when you get to that status and all these things. And I know, of course, there was the aspects of the classes where you have the working class, there was a true middle class then, and then you have the affluent and everything, and these things showcased itself a lot in which people thought about food. Now, needless to say, uh, before then, the what's that? I'm trying to think of it. That old mentality, chopped liver sort of mentality. I can't remember what that was from, either a movie or a show. Whenever somebody was saying, "What am I, chopped liver or whatever?" So, not needless to say, not discredit other decades before that. Of course, people were dining out, and they were, fast food was a thing in these other aspects. But the 1980s started becoming its own because people were more encouraged to be very commercialization was very encouraged because there was more and more and more reasons to seek things out because, of, not from what I understand. And then those who have lived the 1980s, actually were through the ins and outs. Either you were like a teenager you were understood enough what was going on, an adult, reach out to me. Let me know what your thought process was about the 1980s. Okay? All right. And so, people, for the most part, were, have a surplus to where they could do things like this, right? And then the market was reflecting that, hey, you want family dining, you can come here. Hey, you want high cuisine, you can do this, and so forth. And so this coin of phrase yuppie started to really become its own because that was considered the winning prize here, because if you were, had that, as far as social status, if you were able to obtain that achievement, then this whole aspects of being very commercialized, in which you wanted to seek things out and wanted to buy things, was very prevalent, and it was sort of like a amusement park for you as far as marketing, because that's what they were looking for. They were looking to attract people like that who knew that wanted to bust their butts, get valuable degrees or whatever, but work their way up the company ladder, so to speak. Whether they, started within the company and they just skilled themselves up, or, so forth. And then they wanted to reap rewards by, spending and buying. And those things were very apparent in the 80s. And then the cuisine was showcasing that. And so it's quite interesting how when you look at this book, it's broken up into different decades. Because when you move on, you go to the 90s and so forth, and to the 2000s and 2010s, and so the aspects of food, it really reflects those times in itself too, because they in between 80s and 90s was vying for these things with the health culture too, with the aspects of how being on diets and being being healthy and seeing yourself and thinking about your body image and food and what that means as far as everything was showcased heavily towards the end. I would say towards from my point of view, the more, not needless to say it wasn't there in the middle part of the 80s and so forth, but really tried to was strutting along and bringing up his stride, you know, when it was as far as, because there was, with exercise and movements and everything of the 1980s, and, with the Jane Fonda workout and all these, those were prevalent. And people, with the Slim Fast and things, and, figuring that stuff out and making that work. But it became more and more concrete, when we move on to the 1990s and so forth. And then, when we get into the 2000s and 2010s and stuff, people started to say, well, the shift started to change with the aspects of gastronomy and science. And these things are blended together. And they pulled chefs that were experimenting and showcasing this for its time, and how that reshaped and redefined culture. And I really appreciate this book because it understands not only what a chef not only the skills that a chef brings, if you want to say metaphorically speaking, to the table, but also how why in which the way they thought about food makes culture. Case in point, the aspects of chemistry in food. This started becoming really its own in the 2010s. And so, around with that, you started to see the aspects of, all right, so you mean to tell me I can break down the molecules, so to speak, of an apple pie and just have it presented to me this way, to where it deconstructs the way apple pie is traditionally presented. Mind-blowing. The aspects of, steak tartare, something like that, right? Now that's something to say about the aspects of how prolific science and technology is, particularly during the 2010s and then so forth, and the shift in which people think and were perceiving the aspects of the technology and culture, right? Now it's sad to say now, I don't know, it's weird how that things like that work itself out, where you think it would be more feet. Well, there are feats, but you gotta. It's just not, which unfortunately, it's just not presented or talked about more and where it should be than this mindless stuff that's being presented with influencer culture, or saying the aspects of social media is dumbing down society, which I don't disagree with, but I see it like this. I had that mentality growing up with technology, particularly because I'm a 90s kid here, okay? Now I see, I guess you can say, I'm quite different because I actually enjoy technology, and technology is very, very fascinating to me. So, science and stuff like these things too. But no, I always had the mentality that technology, you should see it as a tool to help with things, to make things more efficient. And it's just unfortunate that the way in which things are used with technology now is making people more inefficient, which is very telling into also showcasing the way in which the cultures are shifting their attitudes towards how does technology, how do I really process and feel, what are my takeaways or what have you about it, you know. So to wrap things up, I really appreciate when I come around to find books that get into those elements, because I can't stress enough, culture in itself is really a benchmark into the mental consciousness of a culture. And then when you dig deeper down into the elements of it, it really says a lot. All right, so I can't wait to dive in more and dig in more with the recipes that are presented in this book, and then also in the aspects in which the particular 100 best are presented in this book and talked about, and all of the details. I'll give you all those details on Wednesday. All right, so feel free if you want to extend out the conversation here. Reach out to me. Go ahead. Don't be shy. Yeah, I appreciate all of y'all, and it really means a lot when people reach out. When I get feedback, and every now and then here. Wish I got more feedback, but y'all, come on, reach out to me, because it really helps me to know and process how y'all perceive this, or what you want to see, what you like, and all these things. Just go ahead and reach out. Best way to do that is through email, and of course YouTube comments. And then if it tickles your fancy for me to read your comments, or you will want to be showcased in the show, or I will do that. All right, so this reaches the end of the Harmony in Life. Tune in. Definitely turn it all the way up. Bye-bye for now.